Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a real honor to take this moment to review a question I asked back in June, but particularly and unusually for adjournment proceedings, I'm following my colleague, the Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre, who just in debate pointed out to the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary the inadequacies of the current government's plan. At this point, I'm taking up on a similar theme, but based on a different question. I think I will be discussing and debating this matter with a different parliamentary secretary. We are now days from the end of COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, a disappointing and, in fact, at this stage in the planet's trajectory towards what the Secretary General of the United Nations calls the highway to climate hell. When you fail to do what's needed, it's not just disappointing, it's criminal. We are standing here on the very edge of too late, as we know. Back in June, this is the question that I put to the Prime Minister, which was in relation to the most recent report we have from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which should be understood as the largest peer review system of science that humanity has ever constructed. It's a very cumbersome process. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reviews massive amounts of peer-reviewed science and reports roughly on a full assessment every 6 to 7 years. So inevitably, with a cumbersome process of that nature, their reports always overestimate how much time we have and underestimate the level of risk and danger in which we find ourselves. So that makes me particularly alarmed that on April 4th, as I referenced in my question in June, the IPCC advanced the clock on too late and warned us that for humanity to have any chance of holding to what we agreed to do in the Paris Agreement, hold global average temperature increase to as far below 2 degrees as possible, 2 degrees Celsius global average temperature increase, and preferably to hold to 1.5 degrees. Last year at COP26 in Glasgow, as we all headed home feeling that disappointment, the president of the COP from the UK said, well, 1.5 is on life support. Really, it's very hard to believe we could possibly hold to 1.5 at this point. And that's because the most recent information from the IPCC, which I referenced in my question in June, was that in order to hold to 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees, we must ensure that global emissions peak, hit their highest point ever, and begin to fall between 2020 and at the latest before 2025. The window on us having a livable world for our kids to avoid self-accelerating, unstoppable, irreversible climate breakdown, that window closes before our next election, thanks to the cozy deal the Liberals and the NDP have cooked up with no further action. The response I got from the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary in question period was that the government's ambitious agenda would ensure, quote, that we will do what is needed to reach our emissions projections. Here's the problem, Mr. Speaker. The government's targets are not aligned with the science. The government's targets will amount to too little too late. And the government's proactive promotion of new fossil fuel infrastructure and new fossil fuel development, projects like the Canadian people paying billions of dollars to build the Trans Mountain Pipeline, putting in place fossil fuel infrastructure to take us to that climate hell, to developing Bay du Nord offshore Newfoundland. These are unforgivable, and I ask the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to clarify how we can claim to be a climate leader.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources and the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to begin by saying I share the sense of urgency that my friend was just speaking about. As a person who sees it in the natural disasters that we are seeing in our country, as a mother, as someone who cares deeply about her community, about her country, and about this world. So I share that. And that is why I see it. I see the work and the commitment to doing that hard work. And it isn't easy. Anyone who says it is easy is actually missing the point. And I'm not suggesting my friend is saying that it is easy. I know that she recognizes that this is a big challenge that we are facing. But we are taking that on. You know, we are We set an ambitious and achievable emissions reductions target of 40 to 45% below 2000 levels by 2030, net zero emissions by 2050. That's backed by science. When we talk about the IPCC and the scientists who are doing that heavy lifting, we have on our net zero advisory board people who are also working on those reports that are helping to guide the work that we are doing. Since 2016, the Government of Canada has been taking actions, and the most recent one that you will have seen in the spring was the emissions reductions plan. And that is a really important piece because I wanted to really reiterate, this isn't about just one sector in our economy. We need to take action across all sectors of our economy. This is a large transition that we're in the middle of. And as we do that, we need to make sure we have an opportunity as well, and we do have an opportunity to have a strong economy, to create sustainable jobs, and to make sure that our country is well placed to meet the challenge of the emissions that we must reduce and at the same time create those jobs. So when I'm talking about that, my home city of Toronto, the largest source of emissions is actually our buildings. People don't talk about the built sector very much, but right now, part of the work that we are doing is on a green building strategy. And in fact, just today, there was an announcement about further funding to help support Canadians in making that transition off of oil heating into heat pumps. That is part of how we can increase affordability, help Canadians who are trying to make those changes for the environment at the same time. Now, that's just one piece. Another part of it is how do we reduce emissions from our transportation sector, also a very large sector for emissions. We're putting in place a mandate, a sales mandate, that would mean that by 2035, all new cars sold in Canada will be zero emissions. And to back that up, because this is a whole thing, as I said, it's across all sectors, it's about addressing these issues in a very holistic sense. We're also building the charging infrastructure that is required to support those vehicles. It's part of a holistic plan, and that's what I would really like to emphasize. It's not just one thing. You can always pick at one thing and say the carbon price alone won't do it. We recognize that this is going to take many tools, and that is exactly what we're doing. And we have been putting that hard work, putting a price on carbon pollution, methane regulations, the sales mandates for zero-emission vehicles. I'm not going to get through the whole list in the time that I have, Mr. Speaker, but the green building strategy. At the same time, battery manufacturing is happening here in our country to help support that transition right across North America. We've invested in an energy transition center in Calgary that's going to be helping to build out that renewable energy sector that's doing so well, thriving in Alberta. These are opportunities, and we need to seize them at the same time as we meet that challenge to reduce emissions across our country, because it's our obligation and we have undertaken to do it.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, as predicted, government spokespersons raise the good things that they are doing, and they are good. Heat pumps are good. More charging stations for electric cars are good. You pile them up, and you have a drop in the bucket. Then you see the buckets of money going in to violating Indigenous rights, to forcing through the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is only halfway built and the most dangerous terrain is yet to come, to spend $21 billion of public money on a project that the International Energy Agency, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has every international energy review has said, don't put any more money into expanding fossil fuel infrastructure. It is, in the words of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, economic and moral madness. But this government is committed to madness.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, as I said in my opening part, and I will repeat once again, what we are focused on is reducing emissions, and that is what we are doing, be it through reducing emissions from our buildings, be it reducing emissions from our transportation sectors, be it putting a cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector. All of these pieces come together. It's building out our renewable energies, making sure we have an electric grid that can support it all. There are many pieces that have to come together. We are doing it. You can see the tangible pieces that are coming together to make it happen. We will make sure that we do everything we can to reduce emissions across our country.